The torrential downpour outside was nothing compared to the storm raging inside the Sterling mansion. One moment, Isabella Sterling was cradling her stomach, dreaming of the nursery she'd designed. The next, she was staring at a set of glossy photographs her husband Nathaniel had just thrown on the marble coffee table. They showed her in a seemingly compromising position with a man she'd never met. It was a lie, a cruel, impossible lie, and yet the venom in her mother-in-law's eyes and the chilling emptiness in her husband's confirmed her fate. Before she could even process the betrayal, the heavy oak doors of the life she knew were slammed shut behind her, leaving her pregnant, penniless, and alone in the unforgiving night. But they made one fatal mistake. They forgot about the one man more powerful than all of them, her billionaire father-in-law, Richard Sterling. And he was about to find out everything. The air in the grand drawing room of the Sterling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, was thick with the scent of lilies and betrayal. The lilies, funereal and white, were Genevieve Sterling's favorite. The betrayal was a new addition to the decor. Isabella Rossi Sterling stood on the Aubusson carpet, the plush wool a cruel mockery of comfort beneath her trembling feet. The silk of her maternity blouse, once a soft caress, now felt like a shroud. Her hand instinctively went to the gentle curve of her belly, a silent promise to the tiny life within, that she would protect them, even as her own world was being systematically demolished. Across from her, her husband of 2 years, Nathaniel Sterling, wouldn't meet her gaze. His handsome face, usually so quick to smile, was a mask of strained indifference. His attention was fixed on the damning photographs scattered across the polished surface of a Louis XV coffee table. They were expertly crafted forgeries, showing Isabella in an intimate cafe setting with a man whose face was artfully obscured, his hand resting on hers. A private moment that never happened. A lie spun from pixels and malice. The architect of this destruction, Genevieve Sterling, stood beside her son, a vision in Chanel tweed and icy condescension. Her silver hair was coiffed into a perfect helmet, unyielding and severe, much like the woman herself. Her eyes the same cold grey as a winter sky raked over Isabella with undisguised contempt. "I knew it from the start." Genevieve began, her voice a low, cultured hiss that cut deeper than any shout. "I told you, Nathaniel. Blood will always out. You can't turn a little museum curator from Brooklyn into a Sterling. She has no breeding, no integrity." "Genevieve, please," Isabella whispered, her voice cracking. "Nathaniel, look at me. You know me. This isn't real. Someone did this to us." Nathaniel finally lifted his head. The conflict in his eyes was agonizing to watch. He was a man caught between the woman he professed to love and the mother whose approval he had craved his entire life. But weakness, Isabella was learning, was a far more corrosive acid than outright evil. "They are dated Bella," he said, his voice hollow. "From last month, while I was in Singapore. My mother's investigator has phone records too. A man named... It doesn't matter. How could you? There is no man." Isabella's voice rose, laced with a desperation that only seemed to confirm her guilt in their eyes. "I was at the Met planning the new exhibit. I was attending prenatal appointments. I was here waiting for you. This is a lie." Genevieve let out a delicate, theatrical scoff. "Oh, the drama! And to think you're carrying a child. Are you even certain it's Nathaniel's, or does it belong to your accomplice?" The accusation struck Isabella with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She looked at Nathaniel, pleading with her eyes for him to defend her, to defend their child. He just shook his head, a gesture of pathetic surrender. In that moment, the love she thought they shared evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard stone of realization in her gut. He was not her partner. He was his mother's son. "I want her out of my house," Genevieve declared, turning to Nathaniel as if Isabella were no longer in the room. "Now, with nothing but the clothes on her back. We will have our lawyers draft a quiet annulment, citing irreconcilable differences. We'll be generous, of course, provided she signs a non-disclosure agreement and disappears." "Wait," Isabella stammered, her mind racing. "My things, my purse, my phone." Genevieve smiled, a tight, cruel stretching of her lips. "Your privileges have been revoked. The Sterling legal team will handle the disposition of your effects. You will be escorted from the premises." She pressed a small, discreet button on the wall. Within seconds, 2 burly security guards in dark suits entered the room, their faces impassive. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Isabella's shock. "Nathaniel, don't let her do this. This is our home. This is our baby." He flinched at the word baby, the only flicker of humanity he'd shown. But it was fleeting. He looked away toward the rain-lashed windows. "It's for the best, Bella. My mother, she knows what's right for the family." "The family?" Isabella's voice dripped with a sudden icy calm. The desperation was gone, replaced by a clarity born of absolute betrayal. "Or the Sterling brand, the Sterling fortune." The guards flanking her now gently took her arms. The touch was professional, but it felt like a violation. She didn't resist. She walked with a dignity she didn't know she possessed, her head held high. As they passed Nathaniel, she stopped and looked directly at him, forcing him to meet her gaze one last time. "I will never forget this, Nathaniel," she said, her voice low and steady. "And one day you will have to explain to your child why you let your mother throw their pregnant mother out into a storm based on a lie." He had no response. He just stood there, a hollow man in a gilded cage. The heavy front doors swung open, revealing a night ripped apart by wind and rain. The manicured lawns of the estate were shrouded in a churning darkness. One of the guards held an umbrella, a perfunctory gesture of courtesy that was almost insulting. He walked her down the sweeping stone steps to the edge of the long, winding driveway. "A car will be here in 5 minutes to take you to a hotel for the night," he said gruffly, clearly uncomfortable. Isabella shook her head. She knew what that meant. A hotel chosen by Genevieve. A gilded prison where she would be watched, managed, and forced to sign away her life. "No, thank you," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "I'll find my own way." Before the guard could protest, she turned and started walking. The rain immediately plastered her silk blouse to her skin, the cold seeping into her bones. The wind tore at her hair, whipping it across her face. Each step down the long private road, away from the mocking lights of the mansion, was an act of sheer will. She had no phone, no wallet, no plan. All she had was the fierce, primal instinct to protect the life growing inside her, and a burning, righteous anger that was quickly becoming the only thing keeping her warm. The gates of the Sterling estate loomed ahead, a black iron portcullis marking the border between a life of luxurious lies and a future of terrifying unknown truth. And as she passed through them, a sob finally escaped her lips, lost in the howling of the wind. She was free, but she had never felt more alone. The walk from the Sterling estate to the main road felt like a pilgrimage through purgatory. Each squelch of her soaked designer flats on the asphalt was a reminder of the life she had just lost. The manicured hedges and ancient oak trees that lined the private drive, once symbols of sanctuary and permanence, now seemed like silent, judgmental sentinels. By the time Isabella reached the main road, she was drenched, shivering, and utterly disoriented. The passing headlights of cars cut through the deluge, illuminating her for a brief, startling moment, a ghost of a woman in a ruined silk blouse standing on the edge of nowhere. For a terrifying hour, she walked her mind a maelstrom of shock and grief. The initial adrenaline had worn off, leaving a bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the rain. How could Nathaniel believe it? How could the man who had whispered promises of forever in her ear just last week now look at her with such cold suspicion? And Genevieve. Isabella had always known her mother-in-law was difficult, that she saw Isabella as an inadequate addition to her perfect dynasty. But she had never imagined this level of calculated cruelty. To fabricate evidence to poison her own son's mind, to cast out his pregnant wife without a shred of compassion. It was monstrous. Her feet were raw, her body ached, but one thought propelled her forward. Chloe. Chloe Davis was her opposite in almost every way. Where Isabella was thoughtful and measured, Chloe was a firecracker of righteous indignation and fierce loyalty. A tenacious journalist for an online investigative news outlet, Chloe lived in a cramped but vibrant fourth-floor walk-up in Astoria, Queens, a universe away from the sterile opulence of Greenwich. They had been friends since their scholarship days at Columbia, a bond forged over late-night study sessions and cheap pizza. Hitching a ride was out of the question. Flagging down a taxi without a penny to her name was impossible. Her only hope was the train station a few miles away. She remembered seeing it once on a drive with Nathaniel. She focused on the memory, using it as a beacon. When she finally stumbled onto the platform, she must have looked like a wraith. A sympathetic station agent, a kind-faced woman named Martha, saw her shivering form and took pity on her. "Honey, are you all right? You look like you've been through a war." Isabella, her teeth chattering, could barely form the words. I was robbed. They took everything. My purse, my phone. I just need to get to Astoria." It wasn't a complete lie. She had been robbed, just not in the way the woman imagined. Martha's expression softened. She looked at Isabella's belly, then back at her pale, rain-streaked face. Without a word, she slid a ticket through the window. "On the house," she said quietly. "You go get yourself somewhere warm and safe." The simple act of kindness was so overwhelming that Isabella burst into tears, mumbling her thanks before hurrying onto the waiting train. The warmth of the carriage was a blessing. She huddled in a corner seat, wrapping her arms around herself, trying to become invisible as the train rattled its way toward the city. It was past midnight when she finally stood outside Chloe's apartment building. She pressed the buzzer for 4B, praying her friend was home. A moment later, a crackly voice answered. "Yeah, who is it?" "Chloe, it's me. It's Isabella." The silence on the other end was heavy with confusion. "Bella, what's wrong? You sound awful. Can you just let me in? Please?" The lock buzzed immediately. Isabella pushed the heavy door open and began the slow, arduous climb up 4 flights of stairs. Each step was a monumental effort. When she reached the landing, Chloe's door was already open. Her friend stood there in faded sweatpants and an old t-shirt. Her usually sharp features clouded with worry. The sight of Chloe's familiar, concerned face was the final crack in Isabella's crumbling composure. A choked sob escaped her, and she practically fell into her friend's arms. "Whoa, Bella. Hey, you're okay. I've got at you," Chloe murmured, guiding her inside and shutting the door against the world. She led Isabella to the worn, comfortable sofa, wrapped her in a thick fleece blanket, and immediately put a kettle on the stove. "Talk to me," Chloe said, her journalist's instincts kicking in, but tempered with deep affection. "What the hell happened? Where's Nathaniel? You're soaking wet and freezing." Between shivering fits and ragged breaths, Isabella told her everything. The setup, the faked photographs, Genevieve's venomous accusations, Nathaniel's spineless betrayal, being thrown out into the storm with nothing. Chloe listened, her expression hardening from concern to disbelief, and then to pure, unadulterated rage. "That absolute witch!" Chloe seethed, pacing the small living rooms like a caged tigress. "And Nathaniel, that gutless, silver-spooned coward. I swear to God. Bella, I will end them. I will write an exposé that will strip the paint from their multi-million-dollar walls." "It's not about revenge right now, Chloe," Isabella whispered, sipping the hot tea Chloe had pressed into her hands. The warmth was slowly chasing the chill from her body. "I don't know what to do. I have nothing. They control everything. The accounts were all joint, but I never had direct access. They'll paint me as an unhinged, cheating gold digger." Chloe stopped pacing and knelt in front of Isabella, her eyes blazing with determination. "No, we're not going to let that happen. First things first, you are safe here. This is your home now, for as long as you need it. Tomorrow we get you to a doctor to make sure you and the baby are okay. Then we start fighting back." She took Isabella's hands. "You are not the timid little mouse Genevieve thinks you are. You are one of the smartest women I know. You're strong, and you're a mother now. They didn't just kick you out, Bella. They declared war on your child. And they have no idea who they're messing with." For the first time all night, a tiny flicker of hope ignited within Isabella. Huddled in Chloe's tiny, cluttered, book-filled apartment, wrapped in a second-hand blanket, she felt more secure than she ever had in the cold, cavernous rooms of the Sterling mansion. The gilded cage had shattered, but here in this haven built on genuine friendship, she could start to gather the pieces. The fight wouldn't be easy, but she wouldn't be fighting it alone. And she was fighting for more than just herself now. She was fighting for the small, innocent life that depended entirely on her. The storm outside was beginning to subside. The storm inside Isabella, however, was just starting to gather its strength. Thousands of miles away, in the penthouse suite of the Park Hyatt Tokyo, Richard Sterling closed a deal worth 9 figures, with a brisk handshake and a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. At 65, Richard was a titan of industry, the architect of the Sterling global logistics empire. He was a man of cold logic, ruthless efficiency, and immense understated power. He moved through the world with the quiet confidence of a man who owned most of it. His personal life was something he'd largely outsourced to his wife, Genevieve. He provided the vast resources, and she curated their social standing, managed the households, and raised their son. He trusted her judgment in these matters implicitly, not out of deep emotional connection, but out of a CEO's faith in a long-serving, reliable department head. He'd met Isabella a handful of times. She was pretty quiet and seemed to make Nathaniel happy. Richard didn't deal in happiness. He dealt in assets and liabilities. Isabella seemed like a neutral asset. She didn't come from money or influence, which was a minor liability in Genevieve's eyes, but she was educated and discreet, which Richard appreciated. He had bigger things to worry about than his son's domestic arrangements. The call from Genevieve came as he was overlooking the glittering expanse of Tokyo. Her voice was strained, crafted to sound mournful. "Richard, something dreadful has happened," she said. "It's Isabella." He listened without interruption as she spun her carefully edited tale. Isabella had been unfaithful. There was irrefutable proof. A terrible, sordid affair. Nathaniel was devastated, of course. For the good of the family, to avoid a scandal, they had to act quickly. Isabella had been sent away with a generous settlement offer, pending to handle things quietly. Richard felt a stab of annoyance. Not at Isabella's supposed infidelity. He was too pragmatic to be shocked by such things, but at the messiness of it all. "Did you handle it cleanly?" He asked, his tone all business. "No chance of this hitting the press." "Of course, darling," Genevieve assured him. "I have it all under control. I'm focusing on helping Nathaniel through this difficult time." "Good," Richard said, already dismissing it. "I'll be back in 2 days. Keep it quiet." He hung up and turned his attention back to his quarterly reports. The matter, as far as he was concerned, was closed. But 24 hours later, another message arrived. It wasn't a call or an official email. It was an encrypted text message to his private unlisted phone, a number known to only 5 people in the world. The sender was anonymous. The message was short and chillingly direct. They lied. "She is pregnant with your grandchild. They threw her out in a storm with nothing. Ask your head of household staff, Mrs. Davies." She saw everything. Richard Sterling stared at the message, his blood running cold. Pregnant. The word seemed to hang in the air, changing the entire equation. An affair was a messy inconvenience. A pregnant daughter-in-law cast out into the street was a different matter entirely. It was a matter of legacy. Of blood. He dismissed the possibility of a prank. No one had this number. This was a calculated move. And it had worked. A seed of doubt, hard and sharp, was planted in his mind. He trusted Genevieve's management of their social lives, but he had never mistaken her for a sentimentalist. Her ambition for the Sterling name was a cold, hard thing. Was it cold enough to do this? His next call was not to Genevieve or Nathaniel. It was to Alistair Finch, the head of his personal security detail for 30 years. Finch was a former MI6 agent, a man of absolute discretion and formidable capability. "Alistair," Richard said, his voice low and devoid of emotion, "I have a delicate and urgent matter. I need you to conduct a quiet investigation at the Greenwich estate. I want you to speak with the head housekeeper, Eleanor Davies. Discreetly. I want to know the exact circumstances under which my daughter-in-law Isabella left the property 2 nights ago. I want to know her current whereabouts, and most importantly, I need you to verify something for me. I need to know if she is pregnant." "Consider it done, Mr. Sterling," Finch replied, his voice a calm, professional baritone. There was no surprise, no questions, just execution. The second call was to his legal team. "Pull every document related to Nathaniel's prenuptial agreement with Isabella Rossi," he commanded. "And I want a full independent audit of every expense Genevieve has charged to the household accounts for the last 6 months. I want it on my desk by the time I land." For the rest of the day, Richard went through the motions of his business meetings, but his mind was elsewhere. He was replaying his brief interactions with Isabella. She had always seemed genuine. A little intimidated by their world, perhaps, but her eyes were clear and direct. He remembered her excitement when talking about a medieval art exhibit she was helping to curate. It was a passion that couldn't be faked. He compared that image with the venom in Genevieve's voice over the phone. A discrepancy. Richard Sterling had built his empire by noticing and exploiting discrepancies. The flight back to New York on his private Gulfstream was tense. He didn't sleep. He stared out of the window at the endless carpet of clouds below, a silent fury building within him. If this was true, it wasn't just a family squabble. It was a profound betrayal of his own code. The Sterlings did not prey on the weak. They did not harm women and children. They were predators in the boardroom, yes, but they were supposed to be patricians in their own home. Genevieve's obsession with social status had, he feared, curdled into something ugly and cruel. And Nathaniel. His son's weakness was a constant source of disappointment. If he had allowed this to happen, he was not the man Richard had hoped to one day leave his empire to. When the jet touched down at Teterboro Airport, Alistair Finch was waiting on the tarmac beside the black sedan. He opened the door for Richard, his face an unreadable mask. "Well?" Richard asked as the car pulled silently away. Finch didn't waste words. He handed Richard a slim folder. "Mrs. Davies confirms your wife's account of the confrontation, but her personal observation was that Mrs. Sterling seemed distraught and genuinely confused, not guilty. She was forced to leave without any personal belongings. The security guards on duty confirm she was left on the main road in the middle of the storm. As for her location, she is currently staying with a friend, a Ms. Chloe Davis in Queens." He paused, letting the information sink in before delivering the final crucial piece. "And, sir, I had a trusted medical contact discreetly check with her OB-GYN. Isabella Sterling is indeed 16 weeks pregnant. The paternity was confirmed via a non-invasive prenatal test 6 weeks ago. The father is with 99.9% certainty your son." Richard Sterling closed his eyes. The quiet hum of the luxury car's engine was the only sound. He didn't rage. He didn't shout. A cold, terrifying calm settled over him. The lion had been sleeping content to let others manage his domain. But now he was awake, and he was hungry. "Change of destination, Alistair," he said, his voice like chips of ice. "We're not going to Greenwich. We're going to the city office. It's time to restructure the family." Richard Sterling's Manhattan office, occupying the entire top floor of the Sterling Tower, was a monument to power. It was sleek, minimalist, and offered a panoramic view of the city he had in many ways conquered. But Richard wasn't interested in the view. He sat behind his vast obsidian desk, the slim folder from Alistair Finch lying open before him. On his screen was the household audit he had requested. The numbers told a story of their own, a series of large, unusual payments to a private investigation firm he'd never heard of. Another substantial payment to a digital forensics specialist based out of a shady downtown office. It was a breadcrumb trail of deceit, and Genevieve hadn't been clever enough to hide it from a man who could financially dissect a corporation in his sleep. He summoned his son. Nathaniel arrived an hour later, looking flustered. He likely expected a debrief about the Tokyo trip, perhaps a perfunctory question about the unpleasantness with Isabella. He walked in with a practiced air of weary filial duty. "Father," he began, "welcome back. I trust the trip was successful." Richard didn't answer. He simply gestured to the chair opposite his desk. The silence stretched thick and heavy. Nathaniel shifted uncomfortably. "I imagine Mother filled you in on the situation with your pregnant wife," Richard interrupted, his voice dangerously soft. Nathaniel froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale and gaunt under the office's cool lighting. I don't know what you mean. Don't you?" Richard slid one of the faked photographs across the desk. "Your mother presented you with these, I believe." Nathaniel nodded dumbly. Richard then slid a second piece of paper across the desk. It was the report from Alistair Finch, with a single line highlighted the confirmation of the positive prenatal paternity test. And I assume you had seen this as well. Weeks ago, Richard stated. It was not a question. Nathaniel's composure shattered. He slumped in his chair, a puppet with its strings cut. Father, I can explain. Mother was so certain. The investigator. The pictures looked so real. She said Isabella was trying to trap us, that the baby might not even be mine. His voice trailed off into a pathetic mumble. The excuses of a child caught in a lie. Richard leaned forward, his grey eyes pinning his son in place. There was no anger in his voice, only a chilling, profound disappointment that was infinitely worse. She said the investigator said, "Do you have a mind of your own, Nathaniel, or is it merely a repository for your mother's ambitions and suspicions? Did you ask your wife? Did you look the woman carrying your child in the eye and give her the benefit of a single doubt?" "I was confused," Nathaniel whispered, his gaze fixed on the floor. "You were a coward," Richard corrected him, the words sharp as shards of glass. "You stood by while your mother, my wife, executed a character assassination of the most vulgar and cruel kind. You let her throw your pregnant wife out of her home with nothing. Not a phone to call for help, not $1 for a cab. In a storm. Is that the kind of man you are? Is that the leader I'm supposed to entrust a global enterprise to a man who cannot even manage the affairs of his own house with a shred of decency or courage?" Every word was a hammer blow to Nathaniel's already crumbling ego. He had no defense. There was nothing to say. Richard leaned back, his decision made. "This is what happens now. You will be suspended from your duties as COO effective immediately. Your corporate accounts will be frozen. Your access to the company jet and vehicles is revoked. You will vacate the Greenwich house by the end of the day. You can stay at the city apartment for now. We will speak again when I decide you've remembered what it means to be a man." "Father, no," Nathaniel pleaded, jolted into action. "The board, my reputation. You should have thought of your reputation when you abdicated your role as a husband and a father," Richard retorted coldly. "Get out of my office." Defeated Nathaniel rose and walked out. His shoulders slumped. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Richard alone once more. He took no pleasure in his son's humiliation, only a deep, weary sadness. The boy was broken-molded by Genevieve into a weak-willed accessory for her social climbing. Now for the Queen herself. He returned to the Greenwich estate that evening. The house felt different, tainted. Genevieve was in the drawing room, arranging flowers, humming softly to herself. She had re-established her domain. Standing near the fireplace, looking perfectly at home, was a striking brunette woman whom Richard vaguely recognized from society pages. "Richard, darling, you're home," Genevieve greeted him, smiling brightly. "You remember Victoria Vance, don't you? She was just stopping by to offer her support to Nathaniel." "Such a dear." Victoria offered a polite, predatory smile. "Mr. Sterling, it's a pleasure to see you again. I was just telling Genevieve how sorry I was to hear of Nathaniel's troubles." Richard ignored her completely. His gaze was locked on his wife. "Miss Vance, if you'll excuse us, I need to speak with my wife privately." His tone left no room for argument. Victoria Vance, sensing the shift in temperature, quickly made her excuses and departed. The moment she was gone, Genevieve's smile faltered. "Richard, what's wrong? You're being rude." "Save it, Genevieve," he said, his voice flat. He tossed the folder from Finch onto the coffee table, right where the faked photos had been. "It's all in there. The payments to the PI, the digital artist you hired, the lies you told me, the lies you told our son." Genevieve's face turned ashen. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. But I think what disgusts me most," Richard continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "is that you knew she was pregnant. You knew, and you did it anyway. You were willing to orphan my grandchild before he was even born, all for what? To replace a daughter-in-law you deemed unsuitable with that vacuous socialite who just left to preserve your pathetic illusion of a perfect bloodline." He walked over to the window, looking out at the perfectly manicured gardens. "You have mistaken my delegation for apathy for far too long, Genevieve. You have managed my homes, but you do not manage my family. You do not dictate my legacy. And you most certainly do not threaten my blood. I did it for us, for this family." She finally choked out, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. "She was an outsider, a nobody. She wasn't right for us." "You did it for you," Richard corrected her, turning back to face her. His expression was utterly devoid of warmth. "And in doing so, you have fractured this family in a way you cannot possibly comprehend. You have shown me a capacity for cruelty I can no longer abide under my roof. I will be meeting with my lawyers tomorrow. This marriage, as far as I am concerned, is over." The finality in his voice was absolute. Genevieve Sterling, the untouchable queen of society, the matriarch of the Sterling dynasty, finally understood. She hadn't just made a mistake. She had picked a fight with the one person in her world who had the power to take everything away from her, and she had lost. Richard Sterling's revenge was never going to be a loud theatrical affair. He was a man who moved markets with a quiet phone call, who dismantled competitors with surgical precision. Not a sledgehammer. His retribution against his wife and son would be conducted with the same cold, calculating efficiency. It would be a symphony of consequences orchestrated by a master conductor. His first and most important move was to find Isabella. Chloe Davis's fourth-floor walk-up in Astoria was an unlikely setting for a meeting with a billionaire. When the buzzer rang, Chloe answered with her usual suspicion. "Who is it?" "My name is Richard Sterling." The voice came through the intercom, calm and measured. "I am Isabella's father-in-law. I would like to speak with her. I'm alone, and I come in peace." Chloe and Isabella exchanged a wide-eyed, panicked look. Chloe's protective instincts flared. "Not a chance, buddy. You people have done enough." "Please," the voice said, and for the first time a note of something other than command crept in. It sounded like regret. "I know what my wife and son have done. I am here to make it right. For her, and for my grandchild." Isabella, who had been listening with a hand on her stomach, made a decision. "Let him in, Chloe." Chloe hesitated, then buzzed him up, standing by the door, with her arms crossed, ready for a fight. When Richard Sterling appeared at the doorway, he looked smaller than he did in photographs, and infinitely more tired. He wore a simple grey suit, no tie. He looked at the small, cluttered apartment, then at Isabella, who was sitting on the sofa, wrapped in Chloe's fleece blanket. His gaze was filled with a deep, unmistakable remorse. "Isabella," he said, his voice quiet. "I don't have the words to properly express how sorry I am for the actions of my family. What was done to you was monstrous and unforgivable." He didn't make excuses. He didn't try to explain away Genevieve's or Nathaniel's behavior. He owned it. "I have come here today for 2 reasons," he continued, remaining in the doorway, giving her space. "First, to offer you my sincerest apology, and second, to offer you my unconditional and absolute support in whatever form you choose to accept it." Isabella studied him. She had seen him as a distant, powerful figure, an extension of the cold Sterling Empire. Now she saw a man grappling with a profound failure within his own family. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why now?" "Because I just found out the truth," he said simply. "And because you are the mother of my grandchild. That makes you family. My family. And I do not abandon my family." Over the next hour, he laid out the facts. He told her what he had discovered, how he had confronted Nathaniel, and his intentions regarding Genevieve. He wasn't asking her to come back to the mansion or to forgive his son. He was offering her resources. "I have already opened a trust in your name and a separate one for the child. You will never have to worry about money again," he explained. "I have the best medical team on standby for you. I have located a beautiful brownstone in Park Slope that I would like to purchase for you and the baby, if you like it. And I have retained the services of the most formidable divorce attorney in New York City on your behalf. You will dictate the terms. Nathaniel will comply." Isabella was stunned into silence. This wasn't what she expected. She had been steeling herself for a fight, a long, ugly battle for legitimacy for her child. Instead, she was being handed an arsenal. "I don't want your money, Richard," she said, finding her voice. He nodded, understanding. "I know. This isn't about the money. It's about security. It's about justice, but I ask you to accept it, not as a handout, but as the first of many reparations that are owed to you. Use it to build a life for yourself and my grandchild, a life far away from the poison of my house." She looked at Chloe, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. This was real. This was power being handed back to her. "On one condition," Isabella said, her spine straightening. "This isn't just about me. Genevieve and Nathaniel can't just get away with a slap on the wrist. People need to know what they did." A grim smile touched Richard's lips. "I assure you their consequences are just beginning." He was true to his word. The very next day, the second phase of his plan went into effect, the financial and social annihilation. An internal memo at Sterling Global announced that Nathaniel Sterling was taking an indefinite leave of absence for personal reasons, effective immediately. His name was removed from the company letterhead. His corporate credit cards were declined at a 5-star restaurant where he was trying to have lunch with a stunned Victoria Vance. Humiliation was the opening salvo. For Genevieve, the attack was more subtle and far more devastating. Richard didn't need a tabloid. He had a more powerful weapon. He was a major benefactor to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the New York Philharmonic, and a dozen other high society charities where Genevieve held prestigious board positions. He made a series of quiet calls. He didn't issue threats. He simply expressed his deep disappointment in his wife's recent ethical lapses, and suggested that her continued presence on these boards might compromise their integrity, and by extension, future Sterling donations. The effect was instantaneous. One by one, the calls came in. The chair of the museum board reluctantly accepted her resignation. The head of the Philharmonic Gala Committee suggested she might want to sit this season out. Her social circle, a fragile ecosystem built on power and proximity to wealth, evaporated overnight. Friends who had fawned over her for years suddenly didn't return her calls. She was being erased from the world she had so meticulously built. Isabella, meanwhile, was moving into the beautiful sun-drenched brownstone in Brooklyn. It was a home, not a showroom. It had a small garden in the back, perfect for a child. With the resources Richard had provided and Chloe's encouragement, she began to lay the groundwork for a small art consultancy firm specializing in private acquisitions. She was reclaiming her identity not as Mrs. Sterling, but as Isabella Rossi. She had agreed to let Richard's lawyers handle the divorce. She didn't want a war. She wanted a swift, clean amputation. But she had made one thing clear to them: Nathaniel would have no automatic parental rights. He would have to earn them. Richard Sterling had not only given her a shield, he had handed her a sword, and as she stood in the empty room that would become her baby's nursery, feeling the first real kick from within, she knew she was ready to use it. The age of being a victim was over. The fallout was as swift as it was brutal. The world that Genevieve and Nathaniel Sterling had inhabited didn't crumble. It vanished like a mirage in the desert. Nathaniel's descent was the most pathetic. Stripped of his title, his expense account, and his father's approval, he was a ghost haunting the edges of a life he no longer owned. His fair-weather friends, the ones who had clapped him on the back at exclusive clubs and laughed at his mediocre jokes, now looked right through him. He was no longer the heir apparent. He was just a man in a borrowed suit. The final predictable blow came from Victoria Vance. She had attached herself to the COO of Sterling Global, a man with a limitless trust fund and a direct line to one of the world's great fortunes. What she was left with was a suspended employee living in a company-owned apartment. She met him for one last drink at a bar in the West Village, far from their usual haunts. "I just think we need some space, Nate," she said, stirring her cocktail with a perfectly manicured finger. "This is all just so messy. I have my own reputation to consider." Reputation. Nathaniel scoffed a bitter, unfamiliar sound. "You mean your prospects? My father cut me off Victoria. The money's gone." Her mask of feigned sympathy dropped, replaced by a cold, appraising look. "Well," she said, standing and smoothing her dress, "that is a shame. I hope you sort things out." She didn't look back as she walked out of the bar, leaving him alone with the bill. He wasn't sure he could pay. Her departure was the final confirmation of his irrelevance. He wasn't a person to her. He was a position, and the position was now vacant. Genevieve's isolation was more profound, a chilling portrait of poetic justice. She was trapped in the 30,000-square-foot Greenwich mansion, a queen reigning over an empty kingdom. The household staff, loyal to the man who signed their paychecks, treated her with a frigid, correct politeness that was more unnerving than open hostility. The silence in the vast hallways was deafening, broken only by the ticking of antique clocks counting down the moments of her gilded imprisonment. Her phone, once a constant source of invitations and gossip, remained silent. Her charities had disavowed her. Her social rivals whispered about her downfall with schadenfreude over lunch at St. Ambroise. They said she'd finally gone too far, that her cruelty had caught up with her. She had built her entire identity on the foundation of the Sterling name and its accompanying social power. With Richard's support withdrawn, she discovered her identity was as hollow as a Faberge egg, beautiful on the outside, but empty within. The final confrontation with Richard took place in the very drawing room where she had condemned Isabella. He didn't come to argue. He came with his lawyer to deliver the terms of their separation. "You can keep the house," Richard said, his tone devoid of any emotion, "and I will provide you with an allowance sufficient to live comfortably. But you will be cut off from all Sterling corporate assets. Your name will be removed from all family trusts. You will sign this post-nuptial agreement, which includes an ironclad non-disclosure clause regarding all family and business matters, or the allowance will be rescinded and I will sell the house." "You can't do this to me, Richard," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "After 40 years of marriage. I built this life with you." "No," Richard replied, his gaze unwavering. "I built an empire. You decorated it. and you allowed your vanity to threaten its future. You threatened my grandchild. That is a line you do not cross. This is not a negotiation, Genevieve. It is a statement of fact. He stood to leave. The papers will be filed tomorrow. Your lawyers can speak to mine. As he walked away, Genevieve finally broke. Her carefully constructed facade shattered, and she let out a raw, guttural sob of rage and despair. She had played the game of social chess her entire life, and she had just been checkmated by the one piece on the board she always took for granted. While their world imploded, Isabella's was being built brick by brick on a new and solid foundation. The Park Slope brownstone was filled with light and life. Chloe was a constant supportive presence, helping her pick out furniture and paint colors for the nursery. Isabella's art advisory was no longer just an idea. It had a name, a business license, and its first client, a tech mogul Richard had discreetly referred to her. She was rediscovering the woman she was before she became Mrs. Sterling. She spent her days in museums and galleries, her mind sharp and engaged. The work gave her purpose, a sense of self-worth that had nothing to do with a famous last name. She met with her obstetrician regularly, no longer in the sterile, high-end clinic Genevieve had insisted upon, but with a warm, caring doctor in Brooklyn who spoke to her as a person, not a vessel for a dynasty. Her meetings with her divorce lawyer were brief and businesslike. She didn't ask for a punitive settlement. The trusts Richard had established were more than enough. Her only demands were non-negotiable, full legal and physical custody of her child. Nathaniel could petition for visitation rights after the birth, but they would be at her discretion and would be supervised until he could prove he was a stable and positive influence. It was not an act of revenge, but of protection. She was a mother bear guarding her cub. One crisp autumn afternoon, sitting in the half-finished nursery and watching the leaves fall in her small garden, Isabella felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She was free. The pain of Nathaniel's betrayal still lingered, a dull ache in her heart. But it was no longer the defining feature of her existence. It was a scar, not an open wound. The symphony of consequences that Richard had orchestrated had provided a stark and satisfying justice, but her real victory wasn't their downfall. It was her own ascent. She was building a life of her own, making for herself and for the child who would soon fill it with a new kind of music. Winter thawed into a vibrant New York spring. 6 months after she had walked out of the Sterling mansion into the pouring rain, Isabella Rossi walked out of a Brooklyn hospital into the brilliant sunshine, cradling her newborn son, Leo Rossi. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair like hers, and she thought with a pang she quickly dismissed his father's blue eyes. But his name was hers. He would be raised on her terms, defined by her strength, not by the tarnished legacy of his father's family. Waiting for her at the curb was not a chauffeur-driven limousine, but Richard Sterling himself, driving a discreet but comfortable SUV. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper, but there was a light in them she had never seen before. When he saw Leo, his formidable composure melted away, replaced by the unabashed, foolish grin of a new grandfather. "He's a Sterling, all right," Richard said softly, his voice thick with emotion as he gently touched the baby's cheek. "He has that determined look." "He's a Rossi," Isabella corrected him gently but with a smile. "But I suppose he can have a little Sterling determination." Their relationship had transformed into something remarkable and unexpected. He was a constant, steady presence in her life. He never offered unsolicited advice, never overstepped. He was simply there, a source of quiet support, a guardian angel in a bespoke suit. He had become the father she never had, and in her and Leo, he had found a new purpose beyond the boardroom, a chance to build a family legacy based on love and respect, rather than power and fear. The divorce from Nathaniel was finalized with a quiet signature. There were no headlines, no messy court battles. Richard's power had ensured it. Nathaniel, humbled and forced into therapy by his father as a condition of receiving a modest living stipend, had begun the long, arduous process of self-reflection. A few weeks after Leo's birth, he called Isabella. "I know I have no right to ask for anything," he said, his voice stripped of its old, easy arrogance. "But I was hoping I would like to see my son." Isabella took a deep breath. "The first visit will be at my house. Your father will be here. You can stay for 1 hour. And, Nathaniel, this is not for you. It's for Leo. He deserves the chance to know his father, but he also deserves to be protected. You will have to earn his trust, and you will have to earn mine." It was a start. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but a path forward. She would never allow the toxicity of the past to poison her son's future, but she also wouldn't let her own pain deny Leo a relationship with his father, should Nathaniel prove himself worthy of one. Genevieve Sterling remained a ghost in her Greenwich palace. The divorce had left her a wealthy woman, but a profoundly impoverished one. She was adrift in a sea of empty rooms and bitter regrets. The society she worshipped had exiled her and her son, whom she had tried to control, now barely spoke to her, blaming her for his downfall. She had won her battle against Isabella, but in doing so had lost the entire war, sacrificing her son's happiness, her marriage, and her place in the world for the sake of a pride that now tasted like ash in her mouth. Life in the Park Slope brownstone was full. It was a place of warmth, laughter, and the scent of baby powder. Chloe was a fixture the proudest of aunts, showering Leo with books and affection. Richard visited every Sunday for what he called board meetings with the CEO, which consisted of him holding Leo and making quiet, happy noises. One sunny afternoon, Isabella was in the garden rocking Leo in her arms. Richard was there watching them with a peaceful expression. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "for decades I thought building a legacy was about steel and concrete, stock prices and market share. I spent my life acquiring things." He looked at Leo sleeping soundly in Isabella's arms. "I was wrong. This," he said, his voice filled with a quiet reverence, "this is a foundation. Everything else is just scaffolding." Isabella looked down at her son, her heart swelling with a fierce, protective love. The storm had passed. The ruins of her old life were far behind her. Here in this small garden, with her child in her arms and an unlikely ally by her side, she had not just survived. She had built something new, something stronger and more real than any gilded cage. A home, a family, a future, and it was all hers. That's the incredible journey of Isabella Rossi, a story that proves that true power isn't about wealth or a famous last name, but about resilience, integrity, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. She was cast out and betrayed, left with nothing, but she found her strength not in revenge, but in building a new life on her own terms. She turned a devastating betrayal into a story of empowerment and created a new kind of family, founded on love and respect. What do you think about Richard's form of justice? Was it too harsh, or exactly what Genevieve and Nathaniel deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice and resilience resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life dramas where the truth always finds its way to the light. Thanks for listening.